The massive chamber of Concordia Prime stretched out like a gleaming cathedral of glass and metal, its transparent dome offering a breathtaking view of the stars beyond. Delegates from across the galaxy had gathered for the monthly Galactic Council session, their varied forms creating a tapestry of alien life that would have amazed observers from any single world. Ambassador Helen Matthews sat quietly at the human delegation table, her hands folded neatly before her as she reviewed the day's agenda on her tablet. She was a woman in her 50s with graying brown hair and kind eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with genuine interest rather than the calculated wariness common among career diplomats. Standing behind her were her two guards, James Wilson and Emma Clark. James was tall and lean with sandy hair and an easy smile, while Emma was shorter with dark curls and bright green eyes that sparkled with intelligence. Both wore simple blue diplomatic uniforms with no visible armor, weapons, or protective gear of any kind. Their hands hung relaxed at their sides, and their posture suggested people attending a pleasant social gathering rather than trained security personnel protecting a high-value target. This stood in stark contrast to every other delegation in the vast chamber. The Zephyrian ambassador was flanked by 4 crystalline warriors whose bodies generated their own light, each carrying energy weapons that hummed with barely contained power. Their translator devices crackled as they spoke in their musical language, the sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Across the circular chamber, the Veltar delegation huddled behind a phalanx of insectoid guards whose compound eyes never stopped moving, scanning for threats while their mandibles clicked in constant communication. Molecular disruptors hung from their chitinous armor like deadly jewelry. The Crothry contingent needed no introduction. These warrior philosophers from the Rim world stood nearly 3 meters tall, their scaled hides bearing the ritual scars of 100 battles. Plasma rifles rested easily in their 4-fingered hands, and ceremonial blades gleamed at their hips. Even at rest, they radiated an aura of controlled violence that made other species unconsciously step aside when they passed. Most impressive of all were the Nexus beings, whose cybernetic enhancements allowed them to interface directly with the station's security systems. Their guards didn't just carry weapons. They were weapons, their bodies modified with built-in defense systems that could deploy energy shields or fire particle beams at the speed of thought. In this sea of armored might and technological terror, the 2 human guards looked almost comically vulnerable. "I don't understand it," whispered Delegate Zuexera to his Zephyrian companion, his crystalline voice carrying clearly in the chamber's carefully designed acoustics. "How do the humans expect to protect their representative with nothing but flesh and bone? Are they so arrogant or simply naive?" Other delegates had noticed the same thing. Conversations paused as representatives glanced toward the human table, some with confusion, others with what might have been pity. The general consensus seemed to be that humanity, still relatively new to galactic politics, simply didn't understand the realities of interspecies diplomacy. Commander Vorth of the Crothery leaned his massive frame toward his aide. "Perhaps their homeworld knows no real conflict," he rumbled in his species' guttural language. "They carry themselves like younglings who have never faced true danger." The session began with the traditional calling of the assembly. Each species announced their presence in their native tongue, the universal translators converting the symphony of languages into something resembling harmony. When humanity's turn came, Ambassador Matthews rose and spoke clearly in perfect galactic standard. "The United Earth Federation acknowledges the wisdom of the Council and offers our voice in the service of peace and understanding." She sat down again, and James and Emma remained exactly where they were, showing no sign that they had even noticed the attention focused on them. They appeared more interested in observing the other delegates than in watching for potential threats. As the formal agenda began, the topic quickly turned to the increasing pirate attacks along the Outer Rim trade routes. Several species had lost valuable cargo shipments, and tensions were running high. The Saurian delegate demanded immediate military intervention, his reptilian features flushed with anger as he described the losses his people had suffered. "Words will not stop these raiders," he hissed through the translator. "Only force answers force. We must show them that attacking Council-protected vessels carries a price too high to pay." The Veltar representative clicked her mandibles in agreement. "Our merchant fleets request escort vessels. Military escort vessels. With weapons authorized to engage on site." Other voices joined the chorus, each species adding their support for increasingly aggressive responses. The chamber filled with the sound of multiple languages demanding action, retribution, and shows of strength that would deter future attacks. Through it all, Ambassador Matthews listened quietly, occasionally making notes on her tablet. Her guards continued their casual observation of the proceedings, James's attention seeming to focus particularly on the body language of the various speakers while Emma appeared to be studying the complex social dynamics playing out before them. Neither showed any sign of concern about the increasingly heated rhetoric filling the chamber, even as several delegates rose from their seats and their guards tensed visibly. The talk of military action and authorized weapons use seemed to wash over them like background noise. When the session finally recessed, delegates clustered in small groups throughout the chamber, their conversations continuing the heated debates that had dominated the formal proceedings. The human delegation remained at their table, reviewing materials and preparing for the afternoon session. Several alien representatives watched them with growing curiosity, wondering how beings so apparently defenseless had managed to survive long enough to reach the stars, let alone earn a seat on the Galactic Council. Intelligence Officer Crixhan of the Veltar Consortium had built his reputation on finding secrets that others missed. His compound eyes could detect heat signatures across 17 different spectrums, and his enhanced mandibles contained sensors that could analyze chemical traces from across a crowded room. If there was something to discover about the mysteriously unarmed human guards, he would find it. After the morning session ended, Crixhan positioned himself at a cafe table in the station's central plaza, where delegates often gathered between meetings. He activated his scanning equipment with a subtle click of his chitinous fingers, devices so advanced they could detect weapons hidden in subspace pockets or energy signatures masked by the most sophisticated dampening fields. James Wilson and Emma Clark walked past his table, moving with the unhurried pace of tourists rather than trained security personnel. Crixhan's scanners went to work immediately, probing every centimeter of their bodies for hidden surprises. The results made no sense at all. James Wilson showed standard human biological readings. No cybernetic implants, no subdermal armor, no molecular-level weapon systems embedded in his bones. His clothes contained no reactive fibers, no energy cells, no microscopic defensive drones. Even his shoes were completely ordinary, lacking the reinforced soles that most security personnel wore to protect against floor-based weapons. Emma Clark's readings were equally baffling. Her uniform registered as simple fabric with no defensive properties. Her jewelry consisted of 2 small earrings made of common metal with no special functions. Her body temperature was normal, her heart rate steady, and her brain activity showed the relaxed patterns of someone enjoying a pleasant afternoon rather than the heightened awareness expected from a professional guard. Crixhan ran the scans 3 more times, convinced his equipment was malfunctioning. Each result was identical. By every measure his advanced technology could detect, the 2 humans were completely ordinary members of their species, carrying nothing more dangerous than their identification cards and small amounts of local currency. He leaned back in his chair, his mandibles clicking with frustration. Either the humans possessed technology so advanced it could fool Veltar sensors, or they were genuinely as defenseless as they appeared. Neither possibility made sense given their position as diplomatic guards. While Crixhan puzzled over his readings, a very different kind of investigation was taking place in the lower levels of Concordia Prime. Commander Thakvar of the Saurian Liberation Front crouched in a maintenance tunnel, reviewing holographic blueprints of the station with his team of infiltrators. The Saurians had arrived 3 days earlier disguised as waste recycling technicians, their weapons hidden in cleaning equipment containers that passed through security without inspection. Their mission was simple but deadly: assassinate the key diplomatic figures pushing for peaceful solutions to the Rim world conflicts, proving that violence was the only language the galaxy truly understood. The council chamber has 47 entry points, Thakvar explained to his 5 subordinates, his clawed finger tracing paths through the 3-dimensional display. Tomorrow morning when the peace treaty discussions begin, we strike simultaneously from positions 7, 12, and 31. The targets are the Nexus Mediator, the Veltar Trade Representative, and any humans foolish enough to stand in our way. His lieutenant, a scarred veteran named Rexkov, examined the tactical display with professional interest. The security response will be immediate and overwhelming. Most delegations travel with enough firepower to level a small city. How do we survive long enough to complete the mission? Thakvar's reptilian features split into what his species considered a smile. We don't need to survive. We need to send a message that will echo across every world in the galaxy. When the peace speakers lie dead, their followers will understand that compromise is weakness and only strength ensures survival. The other Saurians nodded grimly. They had volunteered for a suicide mission, driven by years of watching their homeworld's resources stripped away by corporate interests while council diplomats offered nothing but empty promises of eventual reform. Back in the upper levels, completely unaware of the threat gathering beneath them, James and Emma had finished their afternoon meal and were walking through the station's observation deck. The transparent walls offered a stunning view of the nebula that surrounded Concordia Prime, its swirling colors painting the darkness in shades of purple and gold. Did you notice how the Crothery delegates' posture changed when territorial disputes came up? Emma asked, her voice carrying the casual interest of someone discussing an interesting puzzle rather than analyzing potential security threats. James nodded thoughtfully, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched a transport ship drift past the station. Cultural trauma response. Their species lost 3 colony worlds to expansion conflicts in the past century. The muscle tension in his shoulders and the way he shifted his weight suggest he was reliving those experiences rather than just discussing policy. They continued their conversation with the same academic tone that university professors might use when discussing historical events. Neither showed any sign of concern about potential dangers, hostile intentions from other species, or the need to maintain constant vigilance for threats to their charge. Other security teams throughout the station maintained active patrols, weapons checks, and regular communication with their home fleets. The humans simply walked and talked and observed, as if they were attending a cultural exchange program rather than protecting a high-value diplomatic target in a facility full of potential enemies. As evening approached, Crixhan filed his report with growing frustration. After 6 hours of intensive surveillance and scanning, he had learned absolutely nothing useful about human security protocols. The mystery of their weaponless guards remained completely unsolved, and tomorrow's session promised to be even more volatile than today's heated discussions. Neither he nor the plotting Saurians below could have imagined what they would discover when those 2 ordinary humans were finally put to the test. The morning's second session had barely begun when shouting erupted from the corridor outside the main chamber. Delegates turned in their seats as the disturbance grew louder, the universal translators struggling to keep up with multiple languages being spoken at once in increasingly angry tones. Through the chamber's main entrance strode 2 figures locked in heated argument. The first was Vexthul, a Crothery warrior whose scaled hide bore the ritual scars of his clan's military tradition. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his 4 arms gesticulating wildly as he spoke in rapid, guttural phrases that the translators rendered as accusations about broken promises and dishonored agreements. Beside him, matching his pace but clearly struggling to keep up, was Unit 47, a Nexus being whose cybernetic implants flickered with dangerous energy surges. Half of his face had been replaced with mechanical components that sparked and whined as his emotional processing centers overloaded. His synthesized voice crackled through damaged speakers as he responded to the Crothery's accusations with equally heated denials. "You dare question the honor of the Nexus Collective?" Unit 47's voice box screeched, the sound making several delegates wince. "Your primitive understanding of trade logistics cannot comprehend the complexity of our distribution networks." Vexthul's response was a roar that needed no translation, his massive hands moving toward the ceremonial blade at his hip. "Primitive? Your machines promised medicine for our younglings 3 cycles ago. Now you speak of delays and complications while our children suffer." Security teams from 6 different species immediately formed a loose circle around the 2 arguing figures, their weapons drawn but held low. The Zephyrian Guard's crystalline forms blazed brighter as they prepared their energy weapons, while the Veltar security detail clicked their mandibles in rapid tactical communication. Even the normally calm Aquarian delegation moved their water-filled protective suits into defensive positions. The tension in the chamber rose like heat from a fire. Ambassador Matthews could see that what had begun as a trade dispute was rapidly escalating into something that could shatter the fragile diplomatic atmosphere they had all worked so hard to build. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and the morning session would become a battlefield. She stood gracefully from her seat, her movement drawing the attention of nearby delegates. "James, Emma," she said in a voice that carried clearly across the suddenly quiet chamber, "would you mind demonstrating our standard conflict resolution protocol?" Every eye in the room turned to watch as the 2 unarmed human guards stepped forward. They moved with the same unhurried pace they had shown all week, walking directly toward 2 beings who were seconds away from violence. James approached the towering Crothery warrior while Emma moved toward the malfunctioning Nexus unit, neither showing any sign of fear or urgency. The other security teams tensed visibly, their weapons tracking the humans' movement. Several delegates leaned forward in their seats, certain they were about to witness the humans' deaths. The silence stretched like a held breath as everyone waited for the explosion of violence that seemed inevitable. James stopped just outside Vexthul's reach and tilted his head slightly, his posture relaxed and open. When he spoke, it was in fluent Crothery ceremonial dialect, his pronunciation so perfect that several delegates gasped in surprise. Honored Vexthal of the Sunset Cliffs clan, your stance tells a story that goes beyond trade agreements, James said, his voice carrying the formal cadence of Crothery ritual speech. The way you hold your shoulders, the specific tension in your secondary arms, the pattern of your breathing. This is not the anger of a merchant disappointed by delayed cargo. This is the grief of a father watching his children suffer. The massive warrior's 4 arms slowly lowered to his sides, his eyes widening with shock. How do you know the formal speech of my clan? How do you read the body signs that even my own people sometimes miss? Meanwhile, Emma had positioned herself where Unit 47 could see her clearly without having to turn his head, accommodating the limited range of motion his cybernetic neck implants allowed. She spoke in the precise, logical pattern that Nexus beings found most comforting when their emotional processors were overwhelmed. Unit 47, your implants are displaying classic cascade failure patterns, she said gently, pulling out a small device that projected a soft blue light. The frequency of this light will help stabilize your neural pathways while we address the root cause of your distress. May I approach? The Nexus being's flickering implants began to steady as the blue light washed over his sensors. You understand our cybernetic systems? But humans do not possess advanced technological integration. How is this possible? James continued his conversation with Vexthal, asking questions about the specific medicines needed, the symptoms affecting the Crothery younglings, and the cultural significance of the promise that had been broken. His inquiries were so detailed and informed that the warrior began responding not with anger, but with the careful explanation he might give to a clan elder seeking to understand a complex problem. Emma, meanwhile, had helped Unit 47 identify that his emotional overload was not caused by the trade dispute itself, but by conflicting directives in his programming that prevented him from finding logical solutions to problems that required cultural sensitivity. Her questions guided him through a diagnostic routine that isolated the source of his distress. 20 minutes later, both delegates were seated at a small table that had been brought to the center of the chamber. Vexthal was explaining the specific medical needs of Crothery physiology, while Unit 47 was calculating alternative distribution routes that could deliver the required medicines within the time frame needed. They were no longer adversaries but partners working toward a solution that addressed both the practical and cultural aspects of their disagreement. The watching delegates sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The humans had not used weapons, technology, or force. They had simply talked, listened, and somehow transformed a potentially violent confrontation into a collaborative problem-solving session. Ambassador Matthews smiled slightly as she watched other species' security teams slowly lower their weapons, their confusion evident in their body language. Tomorrow's session would prove far more challenging than a simple trade dispute, but today had provided a small demonstration of why humanity approached security in such an unusual way. The peace treaty vote was scheduled to begin at precisely 1000 hours Galactic Standard Time. Delegates had gathered early, their conversations buzzing with nervous energy as they prepared to make decisions that would affect trade routes, territorial boundaries, and the lives of billions across the Outer Rim worlds. Ambassador Matthews sat calmly at her table, reviewing her notes one final time. The proposed treaty would establish neutral zones along disputed borders and create joint patrols to protect merchant vessels from pirate attacks. It represented months of careful negotiation and compromise, the kind of diplomatic solution that could prevent years of costly military conflicts. James and Emma stood in their usual positions behind her chair, their attention focused on the steady stream of delegates entering the chamber. To casual observers, they appeared to be people watching with the same interest tourists might show at a busy marketplace, noting the different species and their fascinating variety of customs and appearances. The first explosion shattered the morning quiet like thunder. The chamber's main lights flickered and died as emergency power systems activated, bathing everything in the red glow of crisis illumination. Alarms began wailing throughout the station, their piercing sound mixing with the screams of terrified delegates as debris rained down from the damaged ceiling. Through the smoke and chaos, armed figures in combat gear burst through 3 separate entrances simultaneously. The Saurian Liberation Front had timed their attack perfectly, striking just as the session began when security protocols were still adjusting to the morning shift change. Commander Thakvar led the main assault team through the primary entrance, his plasma rifle already firing as he advanced. The distinctive green energy bolts of Saurian weapons lit up the chamber like deadly fireworks, striking protective barriers and sending sparks cascading across the floor. "Death to the peace speakers," he roared, his reptilian voice carrying clearly over the sound of weapons fire. The galaxy will know that only strength survives. The response from the various security teams was immediate and overwhelming. Crothery warriors returned fire with their own plasma weapons, the massive energy discharges creating thunderous explosions that shook the entire chamber. Zephyrian guards blazed like miniature suns as they charged their crystal-based weapon systems, while Veltar soldiers moved with insect-like speed to establish defensive positions around their delegates. The Nexus security team interfaced directly with the station's defensive systems, activating emergency barriers and calling for reinforcements from the orbital defense platforms. Their cybernetic enhancements allowed them to coordinate their response with computer-like precision, but even their advanced capabilities were overwhelmed by the sudden chaos. Within seconds, the carefully ordered diplomatic chamber had become a war zone. Energy weapons discharged in every direction as security forces engaged the attackers while trying to protect their charges. The air filled with the acrid smell of burned metal and overloaded electronics as shields failed and emergency systems struggled to contain the damage. Delegates dove for cover behind their reinforced podiums, which had been designed to withstand exactly this kind of assault. The Aquarian representative's water-filled protective suit hissed as plasma bolts superheated the liquid inside, while the gaseous Etherian delegate's containment field flickered dangerously as energy discharges interfered with its projection systems. Through it all, Commander Thakvar advanced toward the center of the chamber, his weapon trained on the delegates who represented everything his movement opposed. His target was clear: Ambassador Matthews and the other architects of the peace treaty that would rob his people of their righteous anger and their justification for violence. "Surrender the compromise makers," he shouted, stepping over debris as his team maintained covering fire. "Die with honor rather than live with the shame of weakness." The human delegation table sat directly in his path. Ambassador Matthews remained in her chair, her hands folded calmly before her as weapons fire sparked and crashed around the chamber. She showed no sign of fear or panic, watching the chaos unfold with the same careful attention she had given to the previous day's trade negotiations. Standing behind her, completely exposed to the crossfire that raged throughout the chamber, James Wilson and Emma Clark observed the violence with expressions of profound sadness rather than terror. They made no move to take cover, call for help, or retreat to a safer position. Instead, they simply stood and watched as professional soldiers from across the galaxy engaged in desperate combat just meters away. Other delegates who caught sight of the humans through the smoke and chaos felt a mixture of horror and disbelief. How could anyone remain so calm while energy weapons discharged all around them? Were they frozen with fear, or did they possess some hidden defense system that made them confident of their safety? Commander Thakvar noticed them too as he advanced through the battlefield. Two small, unarmed figures standing peacefully in the center of a war zone, neither running nor hiding nor fighting back. They represented everything he despised about the diplomatic approach to conflict resolution: weakness disguised as wisdom, vulnerability mistaken for strength. He raised his weapon toward Ambassador Matthews, but found his attention drawn to her guards instead. There was something unsettling about their calm confidence, something that suggested they knew something he did not. For just a moment, doubt flickered through his mind like a shadow across his determination. Then Emma Clark and James Wilson began walking toward him, moving through the chaos of battle with the same unhurried pace they had shown all week. They stepped around energy discharges, ducked under flying debris, and navigated between fighting security forces as if they were strolling through a peaceful garden rather than advancing into the teeth of an armed assault. Every warrior instinct Thakvar possessed screamed that something was wrong with this picture, but he could not identify what it was. All he could see were two defenseless humans walking steadily toward their own deaths, apparently unaware that they were about to meet the fate that awaited all who chose weakness over strength. James Wilson walked directly through the crossfire as if the energy bolts crackling around him were nothing more than summer rain. A Crothery plasma discharge passed so close to his head that it singed his hair, but he never broke stride or showed any sign of concern. His eyes remained fixed on Commander Thakvar, and when he was close enough to touch the barrel of the Saurian's weapon, he began to speak. The words that came from his mouth made every Saurian in the chamber freeze in shock. He was speaking in the ancient ceremonial dialect of their homeworld, using phrases that had not been heard outside of their most sacred rituals for centuries. "Brother Thakvar of the Sunset Cliffs clan, son of engineer Mexvar who fell when the orbital platform collapsed in the year of burning skies, guardian of the clutch siblings who still wait for your return beneath the twin moons of Saurus Prime," James said, his pronunciation so perfect that it carried the musical undertones that gave the language its emotional power. The plasma rifle in Thakvar's hands began to shake. His reptilian features twisted with confusion and something that might have been fear. How do you know the ritual names? How do you speak the words that only the clan mothers teach to their own younglings? Emma Clark had moved to flank the other two Saurian fighters, but she was not positioning herself for an attack. Instead, she knelt down beside the wounded Rexkov, who had taken a glancing hit from a Zephyrian energy weapon and was bleeding green blood onto the chamber floor. "Rexkov of the Deep Valley clan," she said softly, her voice carrying the gentle tones of a healer rather than a warrior. "Your wound is not serious, but the pain you carry goes much deeper than this plasma burn. The scars on your arms tell the story of the mining accident that killed your mate and younglings. That is the real reason you are here, is it not?" The Saurian fighter's eyes widened as Emma began treating his wound with supplies from a small medical kit she had produced from somewhere in her uniform. Her hands moved with the practiced skill of someone who had done this many times before, but it was her knowledge of his personal tragedy that left him speechless. Throughout the chamber, the sound of weapons fire was beginning to fade as other security forces realized that something extraordinary was happening. The Saurian attackers were no longer fighting back with the desperate fury of suicide warriors. Instead, they were listening to the two humans with expressions of growing confusion and wonder. James continued speaking to Thakvar, but now his words carried deeper knowledge than just language and names. "The corporation that has been strip mining your homeworld promised your people prosperity in exchange for their natural resources. Instead, they have poisoned your water supplies, destroyed your ancestral breeding grounds, and left your younglings sick with wasting disease while their profits flow to shareholders who have never seen the beauty of your twin moons." Thakvar's weapon fell from nerveless fingers as he stared at the human who somehow knew secrets that were supposed to be locked in classified government files. "How is this possible? These facts were hidden from our own people by the mining consortium's security forces." Emma had moved on to another wounded Saurian, speaking to him in the regional dialect of the Northern Territories while she bandaged a cut on his arm. Her words revealed knowledge not just of his language, but of the specific cultural practices of his clan, the names of his relatives, and the particular ways that the environmental destruction had affected his family's traditional hunting grounds. James placed his hand gently on Thakvar's shoulder, a gesture that should have triggered immediate violence from a warrior of his training. Instead, the Saurian commander found himself listening as the human explained exactly how the mining consortium had deliberately fostered resentment against the Galactic Council to prevent his people from seeking diplomatic solutions to their problems. "They taught you to hate negotiation because peace would threaten their profits," James said. "They convinced you that violence was the only language the galaxy understood because they needed you to be angry, desperate, and isolated. A Saurus Prime that worked with the Council to regulate corporate mining would cost them billions in revenue." By now, the entire chamber had fallen silent except for the sound of the two humans' voices. Delegates who had been cowering behind protective barriers slowly emerged to watch as Emma helped the last wounded Saurian to his feet while explaining how environmental restoration technology could heal the damage done to his homeworld within a generation. Ambassador Matthews rose from her chair and addressed the stunned gathering, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "Honored delegates, what you have witnessed today demonstrates why humanity's diplomatic guards carry no weapons. We discovered long ago that the most powerful force in the universe is not destruction, but understanding." She gestured toward James and Emma, who were now sitting in a circle on the floor with all 5 former attackers, their conversation continuing in the calm tones of people working together to solve complex problems rather than enemies plotting each other's destruction. "Our guards undergo 20 years of intensive training in xenopsychology, cultural anthropology, and empathetic communication techniques. They study every species in the galaxy, learning not just your languages and customs, but your deepest fears, your greatest hopes, and the specific traumas that shape your people's responses to conflict." The Zephyrian delegate's crystalline form shimmered with what his species expressed as amazement. "You have weaponized compassion itself." Matthews shook her head gently. "We simply learned that when you truly understand someone, their culture, their pain, their dreams for their children, it becomes almost impossible to remain their enemy. Understanding does not make conflict disappear, but it reveals the real causes beneath the surface anger, and real causes can be addressed through cooperation rather than violence." Commander Thakvar looked up from his conversation with James, his reptilian features showing an expression that translators had no words for. "The humans speak truth. Our anger was real, but it was pointed at the wrong targets by those who profit from our suffering." 3 hours later, the peace treaty passed with unprecedented unanimous support, including emergency votes from Saurian representatives who had been contacted via quantum communication. The former attackers remained in the chamber as honored guests, working with council mediators to address the environmental crisis on their homeworld. As the session ended, delegates from 23 different species approached the human table with formal requests. They wanted James and Emma or guards trained in their methods, assigned to their own diplomatic missions. The galaxy had finally learned that humanity's greatest strength was never violence. It was the wisdom to heal the wounds that caused conflict and the courage to see the person behind the enemy.